Hello.
Hello.
Um, I've never. Yeah, I'm not a troll. I understand the concerns. Sorry, I haven't. Nervous a lot. Thousands of people. But
That's okay. Generally, people who describe themselves as neoconservatives don't have trans NATO Discord
oh yeah,
icons.
that the neocon that word in particular was. I admit that was clickbait because
Uh,
I consider myself more of a liberal. I'm a
I see.
neocon, but not a conservative. I guess I could say.
Well,
Um,
I think neocon is, or being a conservative is kind of part of the moniker there, but we'll work with what we
mhm.
have. Um, Name and pronouns. Name that you'd like to go by at least.
I go by Lauren. She, her. Um, Anyway, I guess there's a much bigger war going on right now that has been getting a lot of attention. But there was a topic that's not very much debated much these days. Um, okay, sorry, I'm rambling. I guess my main ideological position is that America should be the world police. I think that a lot of people, I think that's actually a good thing. But what in particular I'd like to debate with you is the Iraq War.
Uh huh.
That's right.
Yeah.
Um. Anyway, my position relies on. So there's three main arguments. There's the legal argument, so that it was justified under international law, and then there is the moral argument, and that we saved hundreds of thousands of lives. And then there is the strategic argument, which is not going into a 1970s oil crisis every time Saddam decided to invade a new country.
Okay.
Um. Anyway, I guess I'll go one by one by these.
Yeah. Let's address them one by one ourselves. In
Yeah.
the with regards to the legality, as I understand it, the Iraq War was unambiguously not legal, though I'm not that familiar with the specifics on this. I know, for example, that the American government had to lie extensively to the United Nations in an effort to justify it, which suggests to me illegality. If it wasn't illegal, it seems like they could have just been forthcoming about it. But yeah,
Yeah, the thing is, the part about nuclear weapons, about Saddam possessing nuclear weapons, a lot of this was largely, largely, it wasn't a lie, but it did end up to be a lot of faulty evidence. So the thing is, most of this originates from one fabricated document somewhere made, um, fabricating a purchase from Saddam to the nation of Niger in Africa of thousands of tons of uranium, and it didn't end up until after the war. This was found by Italian intelligence services and then passed on to the CIA and MI6, and it ended up after the war to not be
but
um
even that's not sufficient. Um,
yeah, there was a
like
um
George Bush specifically instructed Colin Powell to lie to the United Nations. That's unambiguous. It was said to have been done. And additionally, the question isn't about the possession of uranium, which is relatively easy to do. The question is about the enrichment facilities that would be necessary to produce a nuclear warhead, which are incredibly high tech. And there was no reason to believe any part of Iraq was capable of hosting that kind of equipment, that they had the money or the talent, the equipment, anything that they needed, you know?
I do think it is definitely possible for a rogue dictatorship, a not very rich one, to obtain nuclear weapons. I do think we saw that in 2006 with North Korea testing their first nuclear weapon, and now we have a rogue
We do
state.
know they have that capability.
Yeah, I think the main there were a lot of scant evidence. The main thing was, okay, Iraq Iraq possessing WMDs was unambiguously true. The question is whether they possess nukes, which ended up, or that they were immediately about to develop nukes, which was definitely not, didn't end up being the case.
What WMDs are you
Um,
referring to that they possessed?
Mustard gas, sarin gas, VX. Well, definitely possess mustard gas,
But you
and
could make
Saddam's.
mustard gas.
Yeah, definitely, but not every country possesses large stockpiles of these.
That's not
Of
sufficient for
mustard
an
gas.
that's not sufficient for an invasion. These are just chemical weapons.
Yeah,
Their use is illegal, sure, but like having yeah, like anyone could make
yeah,
this.
they
Civilians
were
could make
being.
this.
That would also, I guess, that would lead into my. This would lead into my moral argument, but they were definitely using them at the time. Um,
Even if they were,
and
like, chemical weapons aren't WMDs. They were pretty specifically
they
referring
are.
to nuclear weapons.
Yeah, no, WMD refers to chemical, biological, and um, nuclear, but they were. I also get into biological. Um, one second. Sorry.
Of course.
Um, there was a facility in Iraq that was disguised as as like a civilian medical research facility, and we have found that this facility was researching anthrax and also cowpox, genetically engineering cowpox to be similar to the extinct smallpox virus.
But we do this. We have gain of function research laboratories in our borders and all around the world. We've been talking about this because of coronavirus. Like
Yes,
the issue is, like, ultimately they did lie. The lie was the idea of Saddam gaining access to nuclear weapons, which they had to lie about and really didn't have any evidence for. Like, we know they have chemical weapons. They used them back in the 80s. But like every country can do that. I could amass a stockpile of mustard gas if I really wanted to. Not that I ever would. And the gain of function research is pretty common, just worldwide.
I just don't think. Here's the thing. I do think there is a difference between the United States universities in the United States developing gain of function for health purposes and Iraq, a rogue state that had invaded two countries in the past 10 years that had already used chemical weapons. That was it's basically like a criminal barricaded in its house
We invade
on an
countries.
international scale. So I really don't see how I don't see how you can argue that Iraq was doing gain of function research on smallpox virus for civilian or peaceful purposes, for the purposes of health.
But your argument is that that it was found that they did possess WMDs, which, like, mustard gas just does not meet the definition of, and they absolutely deliberately lied when presenting this evidence to the United Nations.
The deliberate lie part. So the deliberate lie, there's a difference between faulty intelligence and a deliberate lie.
No, Colin Powell was instructed to lie. I'm not adding my own narrative spin when I say deliberate lie. Colin Powell has since, for decades, said that he was told to lie to the United Nations and that he lied.
Yeah, the problem with this is there seems to be Colin Powell saying this, but there isn't really much. Sorry, I'm trying to look at the source at the same time. I
mean, I think that getting Colin Powell to lie to the United Nations would constitute an attempt to circumvent the legal processes for justifying a war.
So I'm looking at the source. I guess you were.
Wait, what source are you looking at?
I guess I'm looking at not exactly a source, but it's looking at the intercepts. This article.
So this is a Vox this is a Vox article that talks about some of the proven lies in pretty simple language. So in October 2002, Bush said that Hussein had a massive stockpile of biological weapons, but as the CIA noted in early 2004, they had informed policymakers it had no specific info on the types or quantities of weapons, agent, or stockpiles at Baghdad's disposal. It was just made up. In 2002, December, Bush declared they do not know whether or not Iraq has a nuclear weapon, which is not what the National Intelligence Estimate said. As Tenet would later testify, we said Saddam did not have a nuclear weapon and probably would not have been able to make one until 2007 to 2009. Bush did know whether or not Iraq had a nuclear weapon and lied and said he didn't know to hype up the threat. Condoleezza Rice in September said that aluminum tubes purchased by Iraq were only really suited for nuclear weapons programs, which was contradicted by nuclear experts at the Energy Department. Dick Cheney cited a report that 9/11 conspirator Mohammed Atta had met in Prague with an Iraqi intelligence officer. He said this after the CIA and FBI concluded this meeting never took place. Relation to Iraq and Al-Qaeda, little evidence of links between the two groups. Dick Cheney declared there's no doubt Saddam Hussein now has weapons of mass destruction, but as Core notes, at the time there was no confirmed intel at this point establishing Saddam had revived a major WMD operation. Like, yeah, they lied. They lied all the time, constantly about this. They've lied like at every level about this, basically.
Wait, the CIA WMD report. Wait. In 2002, right? Okay.
And then we have Colin Powell's lies, which he admitted that were lies. He has said these were lies he was instructed to tell. At a UN Security Council meeting in 2003, Powell stated there was evidence the then Iraqi dictator Hussein was in possession of these mobile sites with the capacity of launching missiles to distant targets. The Bush administration left the chore of convincing the world that Hussein had such dangerous capabilities to the believable Powell, and he provided a convincing argument to their existence. Ultimately, these so-called mobile sites turned out to be harmless trucks. Subsequently, this was deemed to be an intelligence failure of the highest kind.
Well, Iraq we definitely know they possess ballistic missiles. They literally launched them as Israel during the Gulf War.
You can't invade a country because they have ballistic missiles, but they...
Yeah, that's definitely not a justification on its own. That's why there's a massive list of different justification of various reasons. Yeah, you definitely have to make sure that you're not doing something that causes way more harm than yeah, same reason why I wouldn't advocate invading Russia, because right now so the problem is wait. Iraq was also I'm sorry. So the problem with the nuclear weapons program, like that being a lie or whatever, is it did end up to be faulty intelligence, but there definitely was there was quite a bit of evidence pointing that way, or not quite a bit. There was some evidence pointing that way.
If there was, they wouldn't have needed to lie about it. And at the end of the day, like, in terms of justifying a war, going like, okay, well, some of these things that were wrong weren't lies, they were just incompetent, is a pretty poor justification. If we're talking about, like, your initial claim was a moral one, I suggest we leave aside the legal arguments and just talk about why you think it's good for us to have invaded.
Okay, so basically, sorry, 1 second. So basically, despite the commonly refuted claim that, or the commonly repeated claim that the Iraq War killed over 1 million people, which is literally just excess deaths, that is definitely not the death count for the Iraq War.
Isn't that the best way of finding out how many people we killed, through excess deaths?
No, that can have a various amount of factors, and it definitely does not come in kind of with what the Iraq body count product found, which is that their count tallied up to 119,905, which is likely Probably low
Attributed to
by
what?
a few hundred thousand. The Iraqi body count.
Attributed to what? Like body count directly from our bullets?
To our bullets and the insurgents' bullets and
What about those who starved to
um,
death from our sanctions? Albright, the woman who died recently, is credited, that's a funny word to use, but credited for promoting the sanctions which led to the death of like 500,000 Iraqis, is she not?
So I don't think that
Like that was before, but I'm just saying like that leads to a lot of deaths. Economic deprivation as a product of wartime. Gonna kill a lot of people.
well, there's two problems with that. First of all, the United States did not cut off completely food. They did have an oil for food program, which was it was basically allowing Iraq, despite the sanctions, to sell oil on the world market and get food and medicine and essential items in return.
Is this like a moral argument?
No, I'm talking about your specific problem with not even the Iraq war, the sanctions on Iraq, leading up to the Iraq war.
It's not the sanctions. It's the economic deprivation. When you invade and occupy a country, you break down existing civic structure, you disrupt supply lines, you kill members of families that were breadwinners and deny their family members the ability to get the resources they were provided beforehand. You fuck over, like,
Yes.
everything.
So yeah, I definitely think there was a lot of that could have been avoided by a different occupation strategy. Basically, what we did was we said that anybody who was ever a member of the Ba'ath Party before the invasion was would be banned from bureaucratic jobs, from political offices, from basically any jobs. And being a member of the Ba'ath Party was like having a high school diploma in the United States. It was basically everybody. So this basically devastated the country's rebuilding. So I definitely would disagree with that.
But why should we have invaded? It seems like so far it seems like you're in agreement with me that like everything that happened as a product of this was bad.
So if we put, so I guess this is just counting months. So this is not carrying into effect how much it could increase or decrease by month. But Iraq's estimates put the amount of civilians killed in his genocides and repressions and extrajudicial killings at 2,000 to 3,500 civilians per month. So if he had been in power for just 12 more years, that would have killed 300,000 to 500,000 more civilians. And then that's not even taking into account, like, I don't want to go into pondering alternate history beyond speculation, but I mean, we saw what happened in other, like, Arab dictatorships during the Arab Spring. So...
Right? I'm not sure what the relevance of this is, though. Like, America has a lower life expectancy than some European countries. Do they think if they invaded us and, like, changed our political policies, it would be justifiable? Because, hypothetically, it might eventually lead to more people being saved because we would have, like, healthcare? It seems like this is just bad logic to run down because it requires an understanding of alternate histories in order to make your argument properly. You have no idea how things would have turned out had you invaded or had you not invaded. But generally, it seems like... And intel which was provided by our intelligence agencies prior to the invasion... Hold on, I'm getting noise from your end.
Oh, my bad. That's my computer fan. Wait. What kind of noise is it?
It sounded like a computer fan.
Oh, yeah, let me just switch that way.
Anyway, the issue is that, like, ultimately our intel agencies warned the Bush administration that an invasion would destabilize the country and not lead to much good, and that's pretty much exactly what happened. Like, that's pretty much exactly the outcome that we got. We've really never had a success story like this, where we just, like, invade and just fucking destroy a country and just build it back.
I definitely think we did in 1945, for sure, in 2 different countries.
Yeah, but I think those are fundamentally different. They had an existing government to work with.
I really don't think so. Iraq... Wait, what did you say? They had an existing government to work with?
Well, there are a couple of things. So, first of all, with regards to Germany and Japan, there was an actual effort at, like, post post-war reconstruction. Second of all, our invasion of them was just. We didn't invade Germany and Japan because we wanted to change Germany and Japan. We invaded them as part of a defensive war because they invaded us first. We didn't just decide to replace their governments for regime change, shits and giggles. We like us invading their countries was the inevitable end goal. It had to happen because we had to stop them. They were fighting us. So right off the bat, us invading those countries was a given. It wasn't a risk we were taking with the hope of a better outcome. Even if Japan and Germany had remained destabilized afterwards, it still would have been justified to invade them. The fact that we were able to build them back up afterwards was a pleasant surprise. But we actually invested in those post-war recoveries, with Japan and Germany. It wasn't just us, posting a couple thousand troops in the middle of the desert with no understanding whatsoever of the local government, no translators or not enough translators, a chauvinist attitude towards the people there or whatever. In terms of Germany and Japan, at least for parts of Japan, most of Germany, these countries were economically on par with us. And culturally, obviously there were differences, especially between us and Japan, but there were some commonalities we could take advantage of. This was just not the case with Iraq, especially after we destroyed their whole government. There just wasn't really a framework. There wasn't a functional Iraqi government that we could defer to as a base of operations for positive change in the region. We had no idea what we were doing, and that's what we were told beforehand. Our intel agencies said, we will not succeed here. We will only make things worse.
So to your first claim about, okay, well, Japan did Pearl Harbor, so it was a defensive war. Couldn't you say the same about Iraq's completely unjustified, invasions of Iran and then Kuwait, and then missile attacks and violations of international law?
No, not even remotely. Japan and Germany posed existential threats to the world. Saddam Hussein absolutely did not, despite the lies from the Bush administration.
You don't think that smallpox possessed a
We possess
existential
smallpox,
threat?
and also this was only discovered after the fact. You can't post hoc justify an invasion because you found a lab with smallpox in it.
So again, I still think there is a difference between fucking some university in the United States.
It's not illegal to research smallpox. It what you're describing right now is basically we could invade any country on Earth if we were to engage in this level of paranoia,
So you wouldn't say there's any difference between... So I think Iraq at the time of 2003, after what it had done, they were basically on the same legitimacy and sanity as a fucking insurgent group. They weren't a rational state like every single other one that was existing within our international norms. They were flagrantly
I don't it just I don't, not really. It was a bad country, don't get me wrong, but what? They invaded a neighbor? Okay.
Yes, twice.
Okay.
They invaded neighbors completely.
Okay.
And also use, again, the chemical weapons against
Okay.
ongoing genocide.
Okay. It's just again, if these are the justifications that we're going to engage in for invading and conquering and occupying other countries, we can do whatever we want. There are so many countries in Africa that we could do this to. Should we invade Burma? No, it's not called Burma anymore. Fuck. Oh god, I'm forgetting the actual name.
Myanmar.
Myanmar.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Changed that in the 90s.
Yeah. Should we? Yeah. Liberia. Myanmar, if you want, we could invade, let's just invade, North Korea, I guess, we can invade, South Sudan, we can invade, there are so many countries we can invade if we do this. The problem is, this leads to bad outcomes. We didn't make Iraq any more stable.
Here's the thing, in a lot of, well, not most of the countries, I guess the only countries I could make this argument for would be like Sudan before the revolution during the Darfur genocide, or Rwanda, for example. We could have done much more limited things than a full invasion and nation building, which we only deny Iraq because every other option we had been trying and trying and trying had failed with them. We tried we
Invading them?
tried stopping their invasion, first of all. We tried enforcing a new fly zone. We tried sanctions. We tried every possible. We tried launching cruise missiles at their nuclear sites. They It
Well,
didn't work. And
it's
I think in
yeah,
other
it's
cases,
almost like this approach doesn't work. Like you're making my argument. Like we tried all of our imperialism and it didn't fix Iraq. So our only
yeah,
solution was to do double imperialism, which
I don't think, for example, we should have invaded Rwanda in 1990 in the 90s during the Rwandan genocide, but I do think we should have definitely launched a few cruise missiles at like communication systems, for example, to prevent instructions for genocides. Yeah, definitely limited, or the no-fly zone over Libya. That was not a full invasion, but we can definitely try these things before actually
why don't we try
fully invading.
why don't we try other ways of fixing the problems in these countries?
Like what, for example, diplomacy is what you're saying?
Like what about economic reinvestment and diplomacy?
Oh yeah, definitely economic reinvestment in countries that are poor but still not basically terrorist groups that call themselves nations.
We're a terrorist group
Um,
that calls ourselves a nation state. I don't care. Like the problem is like Iraq, like the whole Middle East situation is fucked in large part because the avenues for economic and political attainment aren't present there the way they are here, you know? A lot of the money in the Middle East is just only coming out of oil. And oil, because it's very easy to get very wealthy off of by relying on extraction from Western companies and getting a cut of the proceeds, is a very hierarchically reinforcing system of economic exploitation. That's why Saudi Arabia has so many ultra wealthy people. It's just the problem ultimately is that the Middle East has been completely fucked and then left behind. Like, it needs to rebuild, but it can't rebuild if we keep going in there and bombing the shit out of it every single time we're given pretext to. I'm fine with providing defensive aid to countries next to Iraq. Like, if we wanted to give weapons to Kuwait, fucking awesome, okay? If we wanted to build military bases in Kuwait to make them our ally, well, they were, but like to defeat like any invasion force or whatever, God bless them, okay? But there's a huge difference between disincentivizing invasion on the part of Iraq and like invading them and occupying. I just don't think we're going to get good outcomes here.
so yeah, I definitely would agree with investing in countries, definitely improving their, or not investing, or not just throwing money at them. Of course, you have to make sure it's not going into corruption, but
Well, at least a little bit, right?
yeah, definitely. But yeah, definitely you could use. We do need to fix a lot of the problems we've created, or at least the British and French, who I disavow. Uh, just the border mess, of course. That was definitely a problem. Yeah, I probably would have agreed with more a different situation for Iraq post invasion with different ethnic groups having more autonomy, but definitely definitely we could invest, but this was a completely different situation. I mean, of course, I've heard you say that you supported Operation Inherent Resolve against ISIS.
Sure.
So
But that's not the same as us
we
invading a country. That's us trying to defeat an insurgent group in an area that we already have occupation forces in.
no, we so we did create, so your position that we created all these problems. Why shouldn't we have tried diplomacy and providing aid to ISIS to rebuild their infrastructure and their civil society before?
ISIS doesn't have a civil society. They're exclusively a far-right militant group. Like, when we invaded Iraq, it's not like we only took out, like, the crazies at the top or whatever. The consequences were felt by the entirety of Iraq. If we destabilized the systems that allowed for the existence of the whole country. you could kill every single person who's a part of ISIS without meaningfully destabilizing their region. You'd create a power vacuum, I guess, which is a form of destabilization, but it's not as though there are like millions of regular citizens that like rely on the ISIS government for like life and well-being, you know? And
I
if there are,
definitely,
if
I
there are
definitely,
people who are reliant on ISIS in that capacity, they're probably better off under under complete anarchic lack of control. You know, because what with it being ISIS and all.
so they're definitely, I think before the invasion, Iraq was definitely much more dysfunctional than you're trying to put forth. It wasn't we didn't just invade a functional, this nation was already devolving into civil war. It was basically in
If they
like
were,
hundreds
then
of
let them
thousands
have a
of
civil war.
starving. Do you think, do you think a civil war would have resulted in less destabilization and death?
Yeah, it's their business. We don't we're outsiders. We don't understand their situation. We're foreigners. We don't speak their language. We generally don't share their religion. We don't have the ability to impose stability. I would rather, if a civil war broke out and one side of that civil war in Iraq was unambiguously better than the other. I don't mean that both of them are evil and one of them is more okay with American business interests. I mean if one of them is distinctly better than the other, then I would be okay with providing aid to that side of a civil war. I think that's an acceptable use of our geopolitical power. But ultimately, we cannot be the victors. We can't be the ones who win out. We can't be the ones who are, declaring victory at the end of all of this, because it just doesn't work. It doesn't work in our favor, and it certainly doesn't work in their favor. They'll only ever see us as occupiers. I would rather wait and that's what we're doing with Ukraine right now as well. Ukraine is different. They're a European country. They have much more in common culturally with us than the people of Iraq. Technologically, they're more on par with us. There are differences there, sure. But fundamentally, I think it's very important that America doesn't just march into Ukraine and like occupy all of it and then beat back Russia itself, even without the nuclear question, just because this is ultimately like Ukraine's struggle against Russia. We should help them as much as we can, but I think that's different, you know?
So I think I don't really know. I'm trying to think of how like I do think the Ukraine situation was definitely different. Um so wait, are you trying to is basically your position is you're trying to say like America's invasion of Iraq was similar to Russia's invasion of Ukraine?
I don't think they were the same, no. I think both of them are very bad. It's pretty obvious, like, that our invasion of Iraq had nothing to do with any kind of humanitarian effort. America doesn't give a fuck whether or not other countries are autocracies. Saudi Arabia is far more of one than Iraq was, and maintains that to this day, and we support them, in spite of the genocides they enable and commit directly. It wasn't for oil, because we didn't really get oil out of the invasion. It's just not easy to set up like oil wells and refineries. Like, I understand protecting the wells in Kuwait and all that, but like, it's not like facilitating this multi-trillion-dollar invasion on the other side of the planet is like bringing us back more money, or more oil, or whatever. That's just not the case. It wasn't for making things better. If it wasn't for oil, like,
Well, thank God you're not one of those people.
no, it's just like this is it was just senseless, and we didn't make things better. You know, my position is that we should support good policies and good politics in other countries around the world, and when things are desperate, when there's a civil war or a regular war or something like that, I think it's acceptable for us to use our power to defend our allies and to provide aid and arms to good forces. Historically, America has misused this power many times, but in principle, I think it can be done well. But I don't support full-on invasions, especially not reconstruction efforts if we can help it, because they just don't work. It's just not something we're able to do or really willing to commit to, I don't think.
Is there any situation, like any hypothetical, I know idealism, where you would Or you would say an invasion might be justified.
Yeah, defensively. Um, if there's a threat they pose to us, which is what, by the way, Colin Powell was lying about. Between the lies about them having nuclear weapons, maybe, and the lies about them having long-range missile platforms, the idea was that Iraq posed a threat to like the Western allies, that they could launch nukes at us, which of course was completely fabricated. But if they were building that and like threatening, like, hey, yeah, we're gonna use it, we're gonna nuke London, and they weren't being receptive to democracy, or if they built some kind of Ba'athist gigafleet capable of wiping out the United States. I mean, sure, fine, like in fantasy world, but only defensively.
So I think so you don't think there's any situation where humanitarian intervention on the level of an invasion would be justified? I guess we can go back to the
I think you can
what was
justify
that?
it more if it's a full like yuan intervention. Sorry, not yuan, UN intervention. But even then, like like the circumstances have to be incredibly dire. Like a full-on invasion seems like a remarkably like even what the NATO did in Yugoslavia was considered a relatively light touch by a lot of people at the time. And it's considered to have had generally positive results, but that was just like one bombing campaign, a death toll I think below 1,000. Like I just don't think any benefit can come from just full occupations of a country, breaking down their government fully, rebuilding one in our image. It's just no.
So I guess your foreign policy would lean less on the level of like George Bush and more on the level of Obama and Clinton. So like no fly zones, for example. Or...
I don't want no-fly zones. I mean, depends on what the country has
So
done.
oh yeah, yeah, I definitely think such as like Kosovo and Libya were much more clear and cut cases. But you agree with those interventions, right?
With what and what?
Libya in 2011 and Kosovo in 1999.
I don't know much about Kosovo. I strongly disagree with what happened in Libya.
So I'd like to go down Libya, if that's all right. So so what would be your problem with what happened with the Libyan invasion?
Do any of these lead to good outcomes? How's Libya doing right now? Like it's
I
bad. These don't work.
well Libya's current dysfunction. I mean, well they've come up with a new peace agreement, but like over the past few years has been. I think that was because of the civil war, not because of the NATO intervention. However, um,
Like
I think
what did the Libyan intervention accomplish?
I think it stopped Gaddafi. Well, first of all, you said you support UN interventions. This was literally voted for by the UN.
Well,
Um,
this was a NATO
and
operation, was it not? Is that what we're
yeah, it
referring
was
to?
carried out by NATO because, of course, but like it was authorized by the UN. But, and it, after the Arab League begged us to fucking do something, um, the problem was, um, so Libya was already undergoing a brutal civil war. Somebody's saying the civil war is kind of an intervention. No, the Libyan civil war was because of the Arab Spring and Gaddafi's ridiculous policies and brutal rule being finally overthrown. But like the thing is, he ended up using his air force to bomb like civilian areas, and so basically this was starting to kill thousands and thousands of people, and so um so what NATO did was they enforced a no-fly zone over Libya and basically prevented these jets from taking off and carrying out like carpet bombing on civilians.
That seems like a reasonably good thing to do.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess we agree on the Libya intervention.
Not necessarily. Maybe I need to go and read over this more. I think I might have been confusing this with another thing. I've read some pretty negative stuff about the Libyan intervention, but I haven't had an argument with a tankie over it, so it might be that I have an argument with a tankie and I have to, like, look over it again, and it turns out they're lying about some shit. I guess the issue that I have is that it seems like these interventions never actually lead to, like, long-term positive outcomes. We can usually point to, like, short-term maybe benefits, certainly not with the Iraq War, you know, but, like, sometimes we can look at these, but it seems like the effort necessary to meaningfully rebuild a country is never something that these intervening powers actually have the stomach for, you know? If you want to fix the problems in Libya, like, killing leaders and doing no-fly zones aren't going to do anything meaningful, and you're really only stopping a tiny fraction of the deaths that'll be caused by the deprivation of the region. It doesn't make it bad necessarily. It's just, it seems like so often these interventions are just like extensions of Western geopolitical hegemony in the most meaningless and virtue signaling way at best. And at their worst, they just make everything worse in the region, you know? Is there not something better that could have been done in this particular situation? I'm not asking
Oh yeah, in
rhetorically. I'll
Libya.
look into it more
Oh.
to see how I feel.
In Libya, we definitely could have took more from the Kosovo model, which is basically where instead of just enforcing a no-fly zone on its own, we also basically had forced both parties to come to the negotiating table and come to a ceasefire, and then put in UN peacekeepers, basically.
That
Um,
does sound like a reasonable thing to do. I would have to look more into it. In fact, strike my opposition to the Libyan intervention for the record. There are still some things that I half remember about it that I remember reading and
oh
thinking,
yeah,
"Wow,
I
that's
don't want
fucked
to
up." But I need
debate
to.
something we're not
No. I would need
relevant
to
to.
go over it again just to make sure.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, this is the same reason why I did support us pulling out of Afghanistan, even though I knew it would lead to a lot of suffering. I think that the past century, the past 80 years have made it pretty clear that our interventions and occupations are very bad at leading to meaningful rebuilding efforts. It's just not something we're good at.
So yeah, I think definitely the United States has done some interventions that could definitely be that have caused more harm than good, way more harm. For example, the Vietnam War, where we were fighting for a dictatorship, and we weren't even. You could even say we were fighting for democracy, and we ended up losing. Well, it ended up being pointless because now we won over Vietnam anyway. But
And the Korean
I
War
definitely
as
think
well.
there's.
South Korea was a dictatorship.
Yeah, I think with the Korean War, I guess with hindsight, we now know that South Korea is a developed democracy, but I don't think we could say that for every country. So I couldn't really justify the Vietnam War.
Yeah, that would have been like, that's like 50 years later, right? We supported a ton of
Yeah.
far-right dictators throughout the Cold War, because as long as they were amenable to U.S. business interests and not communists, we were fine with them. Yeah, I don't know. Look, I'm not I'm not um I'm not opposed to intervention on principle. I think there are ways to do it responsibly. I think oftentimes leftists severely overhype the negative consequences of intervention, like what I learned when reading into NATO's, like the Yugoslav situation, like looking into that, it's like, wow, lefties were like lying about this. Like this is actually like fine. Like this is like pretty morally defensible. Like it's not perfect, but you know, it's okay. Um but the Iraq and Afghanistan, there's just so much dishonesty led into it, and there was just absolutely no plan for meaningful reconstruction, and we were warned we wouldn't be able to get any reconstruction done. So I don't know.
Yeah, Afghanistan was definitely a case where there wasn't, where of course with strategic, there was definitely a strategically in the end it ended up being not in our interest, but I guess that was a situation where there was kind of the Bush administration is kind of forced by the situations to kind of take action, but
Which isn't the best. I I do have to go soon because there was another person who wanted to speak with me, and
Oh yeah, my bad.
also I'm
Yeah,
kind of locked into this part of the game until I watch a cutscene, which I want to do with the audio up and everything.
yeah. Can I
Um,
do one more thing? I
yeah,
also don't want to. I do want to import the difference. I think conflating like Nixon or realpolitik with like neocons or Hawks like humanitarian interventions is kind of similar to like criticizing like Leninists for Stalin's gulags, for example. I think you have those are different ideologies, different foreign policy.
well, I do also dislike
Um,
Lenin, to be fair. I am consistent there.
oh yeah. All
Um,
right. Well, definitely. Thank you for having me on.
yeah, it's
Um,
just keep in mind, by the way, like you can real politic all you want, but I think it's very clear if you take a look at our behavior during the Cold War. Look, if America wants to protect its geopolitical interests by opposing Soviet expansion in like strategically important regions, I kind of expect the nation state to do that. But I think America demonstrated many times over the course of the conflict that they were completely uninterested in the well-being of the people they were fighting over. Um, so if I think an argument can be made that even when geopolitical like titans are fighting with each other, that doesn't mean you have to then sort of permit every immoral excess that they could possibly engage in, you know?
oh yeah, definitely. I definitely not a fan of the Operation Condor, that kind of thing. Anyway, thank you.
Or all the Agent Orange. Yeah, we did a couple of oopsies. No, thank you. I actually enjoyed the
Yeah.
convo. People in chat were being too uncharitable to you to begin with.
All right. Thank you.
Be well.